Chapter 32 of the Dao De Jing, pronounced Dao De Jing, the classic attributed to Laozi, turns on a single problem: what happens the moment you try to name something that has no name? The original text, in classical Chinese, Dao Chong Wu Ming, Tiānxià mo néng shen I, hu wang yu néng shu zhai, wànwù jiāng zai bin, Tiāndì zhang hei yi jiang gan lu, min mo zhai ling er zai jun, qi zhai yu ming ming yi zhai yu, fu yi zhang zhai 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 suǒyǐ bu dai, pai dao zhai zai Tiānxià, yu chu in gu zhai yu zhong hai. In English, the Tao is eternally without name. Nothing under heaven can master it. If lords and kings could hold to it, the 10,000 things would yield of themselves. Heaven and earth would join together and send down sweet dew, and the people, without being commanded, would share it equally among themselves. Once distinctions began, names came into being. Now that names exist, one must know where to stop. Knowing where to stop is how one avoids harm. The Tao's presence in the world is like streams and valleys flowing to rivers and the sea. The chapter opens with a statement that requires attention. The Tao is without name, not because we haven't found the right word, but because naming is the act of cutting. You draw a boundary around something, separate it from what surrounds it, and that act is what names are. The Tao, as this text describes it throughout, is what exists before any cutting. It cannot be subordinated, contained, or made an instrument of anything. And for that reason, the text says, nothing under heaven can master it. Then comes the political application, which is characteristic of the Dao De Jing. If those who rule could hold to this unnamable ground, the 10,000 things, meaning everything that exists, would come forward willingly. The text doesn't say rulers would achieve this through policy or force or wisdom. It says things would yield of themselves. The implication is that when someone at the center of a system stops asserting dominance, the system finds its own order. The image of sweet dew follows. Heaven and earth would come together and send it down, without any command, and people would distribute it equally without being told to. This is not a claim about human nature being good. It's a claim about what happens when you remove the interference. When the compulsive hand of governance lifts, the dew falls where it falls. Water does not need an administrator. Then the text turns to the problem of naming itself. Once you start making distinctions, names arise. This is not presented as a catastrophe. The text is clear that this happens and that things now have names. But once names exist, the text says, you must know where to stop. Knowing where to stop is how you avoid harm. This is precise. The danger isn't naming. The danger is the assumption that naming has no end. A doctor gives a name to a condition, and the name is useful. But a doctor who mistakes the name for the thing, who chases the category rather than the patient, has lost the thread. A government creates a law, and the law serves a purpose. But a government that generates law endlessly, subdivision upon subdivision, eventually produces a structure so dense it serves only itself. The Dao De Jing isn't against distinctions. It's asking, do you know when the map has gone far enough? The closing image answers this with something concrete. The Tao's presence in the world is like streams and valleys in relation to rivers and the sea. This is not a decorative comparison. Streams don't need to be directed toward the sea. They go there because the seed is lower. The Tao, in this image, is the lowest and most encompassing thing, not powerful in the sense of asserting force, but present in the way a basin is present. Everything flows toward it because it doesn't resist. What might stay with someone who hears this today? There's a sequence here worth sitting with. Something exists that cannot be named or commanded. When those in authority stop trying to control it, things settle. But the moment you start cutting things into categories, you've entered a world of proliferating names. And the discipline required in that world is knowing when to stop making more of them. This speaks directly to how institutions actually fail. Not usually because they lacked the right system, but because they kept adding systems. The policy that made sense at one moment gets a footnote, then an amendment, then an enforcement mechanism, then a committee to oversee the enforcement mechanism. At each step someone believed the next layer was necessary. The Dao De Jing asks a harder question. At what point does the structure begin to weigh more than the thing it was built to protect? Knowing where to stop is not passivity. It's a discipline that requires more attention than adding another rule, because there is no rule that tells you when to stop making rules. That knowledge has to come from somewhere closer to the ground, from watching how things actually move. The streams don't choose the sea. They just go where the land descends. The next chapter is 33.